What if I told you there is a city on Canada's Pacific coast where the ultra-wealthy of China have been quietly building a second empire for decades? A city where a single real estate purchase in 1988 triggered a transformation so profound that it would reshape not just skylines, but the very definition of Canadian wealth itself. In 2025, as an unprecedented exodus of millionaires continues to flood out of Xi Jinping's China, one destination remains the undisputed sanctuary of choice: Vancouver. This is not simply a story about money flowing across borders. This is a deep exploration of why the world's most successful Chinese entrepreneurs, investors, and business dynasties have chosen this particular jewel on the Pacific Rim as their safe haven. From the anxious days before Hong Kong's 1997 handover, when nearly 350,000 fled an uncertain future, to the modern era where an estimated 15,200 Chinese millionaires are projected to leave the mainland this year alone, Vancouver has emerged as the ultimate insurance policy against political volatility. We will count down 10 powerful forces, transformative events, and strategic advantages that have made Vancouver the destination of choice for Chinese wealth fleeing instability. From investor immigration programs that effectively sold Canadian residency to the highest bidder, to the revolutionary real estate deal that put this city on the global wealth map, to the darker undercurrents of capital flight and so-called snow washing that have earned Vancouver an international reputation. These are the factors that have fundamentally reshaped this city and continue to draw billions in Chinese capital to its shores. Along the way, we will examine the billionaires who led the charge, the fortunes that followed, and the profound consequences for ordinary Canadians who watched their city transform before their eyes. We will uncover how a single tycoon's purchase of former World's Fair lands sparked a cascade of Asian investment that would make Vancouver one of the most expensive cities on Earth. We will explore the astronaut families living split lives across the Pacific, the mansions standing empty as offshore insurance policies, and the complex web of factors that make this city irresistible to China's fleeing elite. Stick around, because the number one reason on our list reveals a fundamental truth about why wealth moves across borders, and it might fundamentally change how you think about security, freedom, and the true cost of fortune in the modern world. Coming in at number 10 on our list is something you cannot buy at any price in Beijing or Shanghai, but that Vancouver offers in extraordinary abundance. We are talking about the simple act of breathing: clean air. It sounds almost too basic to matter for billionaires who can afford anything. Yet it has become one of the most powerful forces driving Chinese wealth across the Pacific. To understand why, you need to picture a typical winter day in Beijing. The skyline disappears behind a thick gray haze. Parents keep children indoors. Face masks become as essential as wallets. On the worst days, what scientists call an airpocalypse, pollution readings soar to 20 or even 40 times what the World Health Organization considers safe for human lungs. This is not an occasional inconvenience. For hundreds of millions of Chinese citizens, this is daily life. Now picture Vancouver. Snow-capped mountains rise behind a glittering harbor. Ancient cedar forests press against city limits. The air carries the salt of the Pacific and the crispness of coastal wilderness. Year after year, this city ranks among the top 5 most livable places on Earth, and environmental quality sits at the heart of that distinction. The Hurun Report, which tracks the behaviors and preferences of China's wealthy, has consistently found the same result. When researchers ask millionaires why they want to immigrate, 2 factors dominate every other consideration: education for their children and escape from pollution. Nearly half of all Chinese millionaires have seriously considered leaving their homeland, and for a remarkable number of them, the ability to breathe clean air ranks alongside political freedom as a primary motivation. Urban planner Andy Yan, who has studied Vancouver's transformation for decades, puts it simply: this is a place where the world's super rich can park their cash and feel safe about it. Vancouver lacks the cultural cachet of Paris or the financial dominance of London, but it offers something those cities cannot match: comfort, stability, and an environment where wealth can be preserved and families can thrive in good health. For Chinese parents who have built fortunes from nothing, who have sacrificed everything for their children's futures, the calculation becomes straightforward. What good is a billion-dollar empire if your grandchildren grow up with damaged lungs? What value does wealth hold if it cannot buy your family a single breath of clean air? In Vancouver, that problem simply does not exist. But clean air is only the beginning. The next factor on our list addresses an even more fundamental concern for any parent with means. At number 9, we have the ultimate investment that wealthy Chinese parents will pay any price to secure: education. Not just any education, but access to a system where money alone cannot guarantee admission, where competition does not crush childhood, and where a diploma opens doors to the entire Western world. Zhou Shuiguang, a sociology professor at Stanford who earned his own bachelor's degree in China, describes the Chinese education system in stark terms. The competition is brutal. There are only so many slots in good schools, and at a certain level, it does not matter how much money you have. You simply will not get in. For families accustomed to solving every problem with wealth, this represents an intolerable obstacle. Vancouver offers a different path entirely. The University of British Columbia ranks among the finest research institutions on the planet. Simon Fraser University provides world-class education within sight of mountain peaks. And perhaps most importantly, a network of elite private schools has emerged that caters specifically to families willing to pay premium fees for premium futures. The transformation of Vancouver's private school system tells its own story. When Hong Kong families began arriving in waves during the 1980s and 1990s, they brought expectations forged in one of the most academically rigorous cultures on Earth. They enrolled their children, paid the fees, and then asked pointed questions. Why is there so little homework? Why are the standards so relaxed? Within a generation, these demanding parents had fundamentally reshaped what Vancouver's private schools offered and expected. This educational draw has created a distinctive family structure that sociologists call the astronaut family. The pattern repeats across thousands of households. Mother relocates to Vancouver with the children, settling in neighborhoods chosen specifically for school catchment areas. Father remains in China, running the business that funds everything, visiting a few times per year. The family lives split across the Pacific, connected by video calls and wire transfers, united by a single goal. The children will have opportunities their parents could never have imagined. In Richmond, the suburban city that has become ground zero for Chinese immigration to Metro Vancouver, residents of Chinese descent now constitute the majority ethnic group. Over 40% of the population speaks Chinese languages at home. The night markets buzz with Mandarin and Cantonese. The malls cater to tastes imported directly from Guangzhou and Shanghai. And through it all, the schools fill with children whose parents chose this city above all others for one reason. Here, their futures would not be limited by examination scores alone. Education for the next generation is priceless. But what good is a diploma if your family cannot protect the wealth that funded it? Our next entry addresses a fear that runs even deeper. Breaking into our list at number 8 is something that Canada takes for granted, but that represents pure gold to anyone fleeing an authoritarian regime. Political and economic stability, the rule of law, the certainty that what you own today, you will still own tomorrow. To grasp why this matters so profoundly, consider what has happened to some of China's most successful entrepreneurs in recent years. Jack Ma, the founder of Alibaba and once the most celebrated businessman in the nation, criticized financial regulators in October 2020. He disappeared from public view for months. His company faced billions in fines. His planned record-breaking IPO was canceled overnight. The message to every wealthy Chinese citizen was unmistakable. Bao Fan, one of China's most prominent investment bankers, vanished in February 2023. He has not been seen since. property tycoon Ren Jiqian called President Xi Jinping a clown over his handling of the pandemic. He received an 18-year prison sentence after a single-day trial. Xiao Jianhua was abducted from a luxury Hong Kong hotel and later sentenced to 13 years. The pattern is impossible to ignore. In the era of Deng Xiaoping, the slogan was simple: "To get rich is glorious." In the era of Xi Jinping, analysts have updated that phrase: "To get rich is glorious and dangerous." China does not have constitutionally guaranteed property rights. Everything you build can be taken away with a signature. Canada offers the opposite: a constitution that protects property, courts that operate independently, a government that cannot seize your assets on a whim. For families who have watched friends and colleagues disappear into the black jails of the Communist Party, Vancouver represents something beyond investment. It represents survival. At number 7, we have a government program that critics called citizenship for sale and supporters hailed as economic genius: the Federal Immigrant Investor Program. For nearly 3 decades, this single policy served as the golden gateway through which Chinese wealth poured into Vancouver, fundamentally reshaping the city and creating a pipeline that would prove almost impossible to close. The concept was elegantly simple. Canada wanted investment. Wealthy foreigners wanted residency. The program, launched in 1986, offered a straightforward exchange. Demonstrate a net worth of $800,000. Provide the Canadian government with a $400,000 interest-free loan for 5 years, and receive permanent residency for your entire family. No job required. No business to establish. No language test to pass. Simply write the check and wait for your welcome letter. For Chinese millionaires watching Hong Kong's uncertain future or seeking insurance against political turbulence at home, this represented an almost irresistible opportunity. The numbers tell a staggering story. By January 2013, more than 45,000 wealthy Chinese families sat in the backlog, waiting for approval to move to British Columbia alone. Their combined minimum wealth exceeded 12.9 billion Canadian dollars. The queue of Chinese applicants for British Columbia was 6 times larger than the combined annual applications from all nationalities to similar programs in the United States, Britain, and Australia combined. Between 2005 and 2012, 37,000 high-net-worth individuals from China gained permanent residency in British Columbia through investor programs. They brought capital, yes, but they also brought a particular approach to their new country. Many had no intention of truly relocating. Canada was insurance, not home. The program contained a peculiar loophole that would reshape Vancouver's demographics for decades. Quebec operated its own investor immigration stream, and Quebec desperately wanted French-speaking immigrants who would stay in the province. Chinese applicants discovered they could apply through Quebec, satisfy the investment requirements, obtain their permanent residency, and then promptly move to Vancouver or Toronto. Data revealed the stunning scale of this arbitrage. 85% of investor immigrants who entered Canada through Quebec ended up in Ontario or British Columbia. Only 10% actually remained in Quebec. The federal government eventually acknowledged what critics had argued for years. These investor immigrants paid significantly less in taxes than other economic immigrants over the long term. They created fewer jobs. They contributed less to the communities where they settled. In 2014, after 28 years, Ottawa terminated the program entirely, canceling tens of thousands of applications and refunding deposits. But the pipeline had already done its work. The template was established. The networks were built. The real estate had been purchased. And Quebec's program continued operating, maintaining a pathway for those willing to navigate the bureaucratic two-step. The door had been open long enough to transform Vancouver forever. The investor immigrants had shown the world that this city welcomed wealth. Now it took one visionary billionaire to demonstrate just how much wealth Vancouver could absorb. Our next entry reveals the single transaction that changed everything. Number 6 is not a government program or a demographic trend. It is a real estate deal. One purchase, made by one man, that would fundamentally reshape Vancouver's identity and signal to the wealthy of Asia that this Pacific city was open for business at the highest possible level. The year was 1988. Vancouver was still basking in the afterglow of Expo 86, the World's Fair that had introduced this provincial capital to a global audience. Where pavilions had once stood, 204 acres of prime waterfront land sat waiting on the north shore of False Creek. The provincial government put it up for auction. The winning bidder would control 1/6 of downtown Vancouver. His name was Li Ka-shing. Net worth today approximately $37 billion. One of the richest men in Asia. Known in Hong Kong business circles as Superman for his almost supernatural sense of timing and his ability to see value where others saw only risk. Li had built his empire through precisely such vision. During the Hong Kong riots of 1967, when others fled and property values collapsed, Li bought land at basement prices. When the market recovered, his wealth multiplied exponentially. He had transformed a plastics manufacturing company into Chung Kong Holdings, a real estate giant that would become one of the most powerful conglomerates in Asia. Now he turned his attention to Vancouver. The purchase price was 320 million Canadian dollars, spread over 15 years. When provincial soil remediation costs were factored in, analysts estimated the real price at closer to 145 million. Critics howled that the government had sold the crown jewels for a song. But Li saw something they did not. Former Vancouver City Councillor Tung Chan, who met Li during his time in Canada, understood immediately what the purchase signified. He really put Vancouver on the map. Once he bought the land, others quickly followed suit. The proper credit for Mr. Li is that he was able to bring the investment and the initial impetus to invest in Vancouver. Li dispatched his son Victor to oversee the development and brought in Stanley Kwok, a celebrated Hong Kong architect, to create the master plan. The project that emerged would be called Concord Pacific Place. It would eventually include more than 10,000 homes, kilometers of seawall, parks, daycares, and retail space. Estimates valued the completed development between $5 and $7 billion. In 1991, the first residential towers began selling. They sold out in days. The concept of pre-sales, where buyers purchase units before construction begins, had been imported directly from Hong Kong. Most of the early buyers were Asian. The pattern was set. By 1992, Li decided to exit. He sold controlling interest in Concord Pacific to the Hui family, whose son Terry would guide the project to completion. Terry Hui became chief executive at age 29. Under his leadership, Concord Pacific expanded across Canada, developing the Toronto waterfront and diversifying into telecommunications and green energy. Business publications estimated that Hui himself became a billionaire, perhaps 2 or 3 times over. But Li Ka-shing's true legacy extended far beyond any single development. His purchase sent an unmistakable message across the Pacific. Vancouver is safe. Vancouver is profitable. Vancouver welcomes Asian wealth. If the richest man in Hong Kong trusts this city with hundreds of millions of dollars, you can trust it too. The floodgates were open. What came next would transform Vancouver into something unprecedented. A city where foreign capital did not just participate in the real estate market, but came to dominate it entirely. We are now halfway through our countdown, and the forces we have examined are only growing more powerful. We have seen how clean air, world-class education, political stability, investor immigration programs, and one transformative real estate deal created the perfect conditions for Chinese wealth to find a new home. Each factor built upon the last, creating an irresistible gravitational pull across the Pacific. If you are finding these insights as revealing as we do, please take a moment to subscribe and turn on notifications. In the second half of our countdown, we reveal the darker currents beneath Vancouver's glittering surface and the ultimate reason Chinese billionaires keep coming. Now let us continue. Kicking off our top 5 is the asset class that has become synonymous with Vancouver's transformation and with Chinese wealth preservation around the world. Real estate. Not as a place to live, but as a vault. A safe deposit box made of glass and concrete where fortunes could be stored far from the reach of any government that might decide to seize them. The statistics that emerged from Vancouver's housing market shocked analysts around the world. A National Bank of Canada economist hypothesized that Chinese buyers accounted for fully 1/3 of Vancouver's entire real estate volume, spending nearly $12 billion in a single year. When McDonald Realty examined its own sales records in 2014, the findings were even more striking. Among homes sold for more than $3 million, 70% went to buyers from mainland China. In Richmond, the suburban city that had become the epicenter of Chinese immigration, the British Columbia government's own data revealed that 14% of all real estate transactions involved foreign nationals. And those foreign buyers were not purchasing modest starter homes. The average foreign buyer spent $1.157 million compared to $735,000 for Canadian citizens and permanent residents. This was not immigration. This was wealth storage on an industrial scale. The luxury enclaves of West Vancouver, Cole Harbour, and Shaughnessy became ground zero for this transformation. Real estate agent Clarence DeBell, who built his practice serving ultra-wealthy Chinese clients, described the scale of wealth he encountered in terms that strained credibility. The number of people I deal with who have at least $2 billion, it is amazing. I had a client who had $2 billion, was 43 years old, and thought it was a good start. DeBell advertised on WeChat, employed Mandarin-speaking associates who drove Bentleys, and showed homes every day to families from Shanghai, Beijing, and cities most Canadians had never heard of. The pattern was consistent. Mother and children would arrive to view properties. Father remained in China, running the business that generated the cash. They were concerned about the market there, DeBell explained. They wanted hard assets to preserve and protect their capital. Researchers who studied electricity usage in Vancouver's most expensive neighborhoods uncovered a troubling pattern. In the gleaming towers of Cole Harbour, nearly 1/4 of condominium units appeared to be completely empty. Lights never turned on. Water never ran. These were not homes. They were insurance policies. Plan B investments held in reserve for a future that might never come, but that wealthy Chinese families could not afford to be unprepared for. The consequences for ordinary Vancouverites were devastating. Between January 2015 and August 2016, the benchmark price of a detached home rose 55% in just 19 months. Vancouver became the second least affordable housing market on Earth, trailing only Hong Kong itself. The median house price soared past $670,000, while the median household income sat at just $65,000. An entire generation of young Canadians watched home ownership become a mathematical impossibility. The provincial government eventually responded, implementing a 15% foreign buyer tax in 2016. Foreign transactions plummeted from 15% to nearly zero overnight. The tax later increased to 20%. Speculation and vacancy taxes followed. In 2023, the federal government banned foreign residential purchases entirely, but by then, billions had already flowed across the Pacific, and the real estate had already been absorbed into portfolios that might never see the properties change hands again. Real estate absorbed the wealth. But the methods used to move some of that money across borders earned Vancouver an unwanted international reputation that would take decades to address. At number 4, we confront a darker reality that transformed Vancouver from a sanctuary for legitimate wealth into something far more troubling. The city became known globally as the snow-washing capital of the world, a place where dirty money came to be cleaned, exploiting Canada's pristine reputation to launder the proceeds of crime on a scale that defied imagination. The term snow-washing captured a bitter irony. Canada projected an image of cleanliness, transparency, and good governance. Criminals recognized that this reputation could be exploited. Money that would raise suspicions in other jurisdictions could pass through Canada with minimal scrutiny, emerging on the other side wrapped in the legitimacy of Canadian real estate, Canadian bank accounts, and Canadian corporate structures. What investigators eventually uncovered became known as the Vancouver model, a money laundering methodology so sophisticated that international authorities studied it as a case example. The scheme operated with elegant simplicity. Drug traffickers and organized crime figures accumulated vast quantities of cash in China. That cash was lent to wealthy Chinese gamblers visiting Vancouver. The gamblers used the money to purchase chips at local casinos, gambled minimally, then cashed out for clean casino checks or bank drafts. Those instruments, now bearing the imprimatur of legitimate Canadian financial institutions, became down payments on luxury real estate. A provincial expert panel assembled in 2019 attempted to quantify the scale. Their estimates staggered even hardened investigators. Approximately $5.3 billion in dirty money had been laundered through British Columbia's housing market in that single year alone. The panel concluded that this criminal cash flow had inflated home prices by 5 to 10%. Directly contributing to the affordability crisis crushing ordinary families. The British Columbia government eventually established the Cullen Commission, a public inquiry that held hearings and issued a sweeping report in 2022. Testimony revealed that casino staff had faced organized crime pressure for 20 years. Real estate professionals had operated with what investigators termed willful blindness, convincing themselves that money laundering meant suitcases of cash at open houses rather than the sophisticated schemes actually employed. Canada's lack of a beneficial ownership registry meant that the true owners of shell companies purchasing properties remained completely anonymous. The international embarrassment was profound. Canada's rich list was becoming a laundry list. We have reached the summit of our countdown. The forces we have examined thus far, from environmental escape to education access, from investor programs to money laundering, have each played their part in drawing Chinese wealth across the Pacific. But the final three entries reveal the deepest currents, the political earthquakes that transformed trickles into floods, and the fundamental truth that explains why billionaires who could live anywhere on Earth choose to park their fortunes in Vancouver. At number 3, we confront the policy earthquake that sent shockwaves through the entire Chinese billionaire class. Xi Jinping's Common Prosperity Campaign. A political movement that accomplished what no foreign government ever could. It convinced China's wealthiest citizens that their own country had turned against them. The assault began in late 2020. Jack Ma, founder of Alibaba and the closest thing China had to a celebrity entrepreneur, delivered a speech criticizing Chinese financial regulators. The response was swift and merciless. Within days, regulators canceled the initial public offering of Ant Group, the financial technology company Ma controlled. The offering would have been the largest in history, valuing the company at over $300 billion. Instead, it simply vanished. Then, Ma himself disappeared. For 3 months, the most famous businessman in China was not seen in public. When he finally resurfaced, he was diminished, chastened, a billionaire who had learned the limits of wealth in a system where political power remained supreme. Over the following months, regulators imposed restructuring requirements that analysts estimated destroyed more than $1 trillion in market capitalization across China's technology sector. Ma was only the beginning. Bao Fan, the legendary dealmaker who had orchestrated the biggest technology mergers in Chinese history, vanished in February 2023. His investment bank, China Renaissance, announced only that he was cooperating with an investigation. As of this writing, his fate remains unknown. Xiao Jianhua, a Canadian citizen and billionaire financier, was abducted from a Hong Kong hotel room in 2017 and eventually sentenced to 13 years in prison. Ren Jiqiang, a real estate tycoon who called Xi Jinping a clown in an essay, received 18 years. The message was unmistakable. Wealth provided no protection. Prominence provided no protection. Even foreign citizenship provided no protection. The Hurun report documented the carnage. China's billionaire population fell 36% in just 2 years, from 1,185 in 2021 to 753. Some lost their fortunes to market declines. Others lost them to regulatory assault. Still others simply moved their wealth and themselves beyond Beijing's reach. The projections for 2024 were staggering. Henley & Partners, the global migration consultancy, estimated that 15,200 Chinese millionaires would leave the country that year alone. Not tourists, not business travelers, immigrants. People voting with their feet and their fortunes against a system that had demonstrated it could destroy decades of wealth accumulation overnight. They needed somewhere to go. History had already shown them where. Number 2 takes us back to the original Exodus, the event that first established Vancouver as a sanctuary for Chinese wealth and created the template that every subsequent wave would follow. The 1997 handover of Hong Kong from British to Chinese sovereignty. The countdown began in 1984, when Britain and China signed the joint declaration promising Hong Kong 50 years of autonomy under the formula of one country, two systems. For Hong Kong's business elite, this guarantee was not reassuring. It was terrifying. They had seen what communist rule meant for private wealth on the mainland. They had watched the Cultural Revolution destroy fortunes and families alike. A promise of 50 years simply meant that catastrophe was delayed, not prevented. The migration began immediately. Between 1984 and 1997, 335,646 Hong Kong residents immigrated to Canada. Vancouver, with its Pacific location, its established Chinese community, and its welcoming immigration policies, absorbed the largest share. The city earned a new nickname, Hongcouver. The Tiananmen Square massacre of 1989 accelerated the exodus dramatically. Hong Kong residents watched their future rulers send tanks against civilians demanding democracy. The handwriting on the wall could not have been clearer. Those with means to leave began leaving. Those without means began desperately acquiring them. By the time the Union Jack was lowered for the final time on July 1, 1997, an entire business class had hedged its bets. Some remained in Hong Kong, operating businesses and generating wealth, but their families held Canadian passports. Their children attended Canadian schools. Their real estate portfolios included Vancouver addresses. If the worst came, escape routes were prepared. The worst did not come immediately. Hong Kong's autonomy held longer than many predicted. But in 2020, Beijing imposed a sweeping national security law that critics said eviscerated the one country, two systems promise decades ahead of schedule. A new exodus began, adding fresh fuel to migration patterns established a generation earlier. The 1997 handover created the infrastructure, the networks, the real estate holdings, the community connections. Every subsequent wave of Chinese wealth has flowed through channels carved during those anxious years. We have now arrived at the number one reason Chinese billionaires are fleeing to Vancouver. It is not clean air. It is not education. It is not even the opportunity to launder money through a permissive regulatory system. The ultimate reason is at once simpler and more profound than any factor we have examined. Freedom. And the property rights that only freedom can guarantee. In China, there is no private ownership of land. All land belongs to the state. Citizens may acquire usage rights for periods of up to 70 years, but those rights exist at the pleasure of a government that has demonstrated repeatedly it will sacrifice individual wealth to collective political objectives. There is no constitutional protection against seizure. There are no independent courts to appeal to. There is only power, and the hope that power will choose not to notice you. In Canada, property rights are guaranteed by Constitution and protected by courts that operate independently of political influence. A billionaire in Vancouver owns their home in exactly the same way a middle-class family does. The government cannot seize it without due process and fair compensation. No midnight knock will ever come demanding signatures on documents transferring assets to the state. This is what Chinese billionaires are truly purchasing when they buy Vancouver real estate. Not square footage, not ocean views, not proximity to good schools, though all of these matter. They are purchasing insurance against a future they cannot control. They are buying the one thing their wealth cannot guarantee them in China: the right to keep what they have earned. From the fundamental guarantee of property rights and personal freedom to Xi Jinping's crackdown on the wealthy, to the original exodus sparked by Hong Kong's uncertain handover, to the darker currents of snow washing to the billions parked in empty mansions, these forces paint a vivid and complex picture of why Chinese wealth has chosen Vancouver as its sanctuary. What are the common threads that bind these powerful factors together? We see a city that offered something China fundamentally cannot provide: stability guaranteed by law rather than dependent on political favor. We see immigration programs that, intentionally or not, created a direct pipeline for wealth transfer. We see a real estate market that became the ultimate safe deposit box for fortunes that might otherwise be seized on a party official's whim. And we see the human cost of this transformation: families living split lives across the Pacific, cities becoming unaffordable for ordinary residents, and a constant tension between global capital and local community. The consequences extend far beyond Vancouver's glittering skyline. Housing prices that reached levels making homeownership impossible for generations of Canadians. Money laundering networks that operated in plain sight for decades. A city transformed so rapidly that longtime residents speak of feeling like strangers in their own neighborhoods. Yet also, economic growth, world-class development, a truly global city that connects East and West like few others. As China's economic challenges deepen and Xi Jinping's grip tightens, the exodus shows no signs of slowing. An estimated 15,200 millionaires are projected to leave the mainland this year alone, and many will follow the well-worn path to Vancouver. The factors we've explored today, from education to environment, from immigration programs to political insurance, continue to make this Pacific Rim city an irresistible destination for those who have everything except certainty about tomorrow. Perhaps the most profound insight is this: the flow of Chinese wealth to Vancouver is not primarily about greed or tax avoidance. At its core, it is about fear. Fear of losing everything built over a lifetime. Fear of a knock on the door that means your fortune, your freedom, or your family are no longer your own. Vancouver represents the opposite of that fear. It represents safety. Which of these factors surprised you the most? Is it the sheer scale of wealth that has flowed across the Pacific, or the darker methods sometimes used to move it? Let us know in the comments below. And if you found this deep dive illuminating, make sure to like, subscribe, and share with others curious about the forces reshaping our world. Thanks for watching.